Yay. Hi, this is Sue Greenwald. I'm with awakenstories.com and I'm doing a video series called Becoming Awakened. And today we have Daniel James. Hey, Daniel,
Hi, Sue. Thank you for having me.
how you doing?
I'm good. I feel good. I'm in good
Yeah,
spirits.
awesome. Well, I'm excited to have you here. It's been, well, a good 2 years since we've seen each other. And Daniel is a very interesting person. He's got many skills, and I just thought he'd be so fascinating to talk to. So,
Well, thank you.
can you tell us? And well, here, I'm going to go full disclosure. First off, I'm an awesome foosball player, right?
Yes, you are. Party at Sue's place.
And I'm
Yes, you are.
teasing because it's so funny, isn't it? All right. So can you tell us a little bit about, your childhood, your background, how you were raised, that kind of stuff, your religious upbringing, belief system, like kind of like give us a structure there.
Yes. So I grew up with my mom and my dad until I was about 11 or 12 years old. And I was born in Orange County, California. And we had a house fire when I was a kid, and our house burnt down. So there's some childhood trauma there to get me going, to get me started.
Right.
And we moved to Washington State, where I grew up. I spent most of my childhood there. In Washington State, so my mother she's a very supportive type of person in terms of the arts. She's a free thinker. She's a truther. She loves alternative news and alternative information.
Right.
So she's not somebody who, goes with the narrative. So
Right.
having her as, a guardian growing up was a positive thing, I think, in the sense where, she allowed me to explore all kinds of different views and perspectives and beliefs. But I was raised Jewish. So I was born a Jew. My mother was a practicing Jew through all her childhood. And I think as I started to grow up and get a little bit older into my teens, I was being, other forms of religion were being advertised to me. And I started to feel sort of like a disconnect, like desync in terms of, my perspective and my feelings towards religion. So I turned down, like anything Christian or Catholic. And then in terms of growing up in Judaism, I just didn't resonate with the idea of structured religion.
Right.
In the way that, gods and deities are depicted to us. And it just wasn't something that was really like taught to me to hate or to reject. It really came from within. It was a feeling of disresonance that I didn't resonate with organized, structured religion from my own principles and my own feelings, because this is a feeling universe. So if something doesn't feel good, you have to kind of like listen to that and investigate it.
Right.
So when I turned 18, I pretty much formally left religion and Judaism, and so did my mom. My mom wasn't much of a practicing Jew at the time, when I reached that age, even though she was born into it and practiced it for many years. So I was, born into religion, but quickly saw my way out of it on my own with little help. Now, my mom is somebody who also is, she'll cultivate any of my artistic skills or my spiritual beliefs. And I was always very passionate and drawn to the concept of extraterrestrials, aliens, life on other planets, any of the sci-fi movies that had aliens in them, whether it was positive or negative. I had to see all the movies and the TV shows. I had to absorb all of this. So when it comes to, say, religious deities, I was more drawn to, say, for example, ETs, life on other planets. That sort of "are we alone in the universe" type of concept was more attractive to me than anything else. And my mom was very supportive of that as well, because she had contact experiences of her own throughout her life. So in Washington State, there's what's called as ley lines. And ley lines are, in a sense, almost like underground currents of energy. You could look at them as like part of the Earth's chakra systems.
Right.
And we had ley lines that ran right through Olympia, Washington, where I grew up as a kid. And on these ley lines, you would have heightened paranormal experiences. Now, that's everything, whether we're talking about, shadow people or ghostly things, UFO sightings, alien encounters inside people's homes, Sasquatch, which, the Bigfoot is very well known in the Western Washington region.
Right.
So living near these ley lines, we grew up in a lot of sort of paranormal experiences with the esoteric and cryptozoology.
Right.
Aliens. And so my mom and I had probably seen, no exaggeration, well over 20 different UFO variants, spherical crafts, triangular crafts, little silver balls, big burning, glowing fireballs, you name it. We've seen all these variety of UFOs from when I was, a kid growing up into my teens and then well into my 20s. I've always had a lot of UFO encounters and sightings in Washington State growing up. And that only just sort of amplified the fuel to my interest in extraterrestrial consciousness.
Right.
But I wasn't what you would call, as say, for example, awakened yet. So I would love to tell you, I did have a triggering point. There was a catalyst specifically in my life where I went through what we call as a spiritual awakening.
So you really didn't have one, is what you're saying.
I'm saying I absolutely did.
Did. Oh, okay. So
100%.
the drum is rolling.
Yeah. If you want me to run right into it.
Yeah, so you can. So your mom was witnessing the UFO experiences as you
for
grew
years.
Up. You
for
guys
years.
were outside. You'd look up and say, "Hey, what is that?" Right?
Her and I had UFO encounters together, my mom and I, since I was like a toddler.
Interesting. Yeah. And that she was with you.
Yep.
But and she had recollection of it at the time.
Yes.
You both did. In other words, many people that I've been with, we've experienced a UFO and nobody else remembers it except me. And I'm like, you were there with me. How can you not remember?
Frequency dissonance. Some people's frequency dissonance there, they might just regress the memory and black it out.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I've had full-on UFO experiences as a toddler with my mom.
Yeah.
And then going into Washington State, we had sightings of a variety of different aircrafts. And then the reason why I'm saying that it's important to my journey is sort of like, I consider myself an extraterrestrial ambassador of sorts now in my 30s. But it started with witnessing UFO growing up, whether I was with a girlfriend who witnessed them with me or my mom. People validated the experiences. These things were all leading up to when I had my spiritual awakening, which I believe, extraterrestrial consciousness was a part of that in some way.
Right. So as a kid, any other, let's call them unusual experiences, voices, angels, vivid dreams that you remember? So you had that throughout your life. Yeah.
The first amazing, what you would call paranormal experiences, I was a toddler in, I think, California, probably. I think California before we moved, more than likely. My mom and I were watching, we were outside watching a fireworks show. And we had seen, mind you, I'm a kid, it's vague, but my mom tells the story better than I do. But we had seen a black triangular craft come all the way down to the city. And it was so, it was so large that it was sort of blocking out parts of the sky. And a transformer, an electrical transformer blew up where we were. And when it exploded, it lit up part of the craft.
Oh.
So that you could see it, the flash from the transformer lit up the craft. So that's how low it was to where we were. So that'd be like my first experience. But then when I moved to Washington State, just to simply put this out there, well over 20 sightings of UFO craft of a variety of different shapes and sizes. But growing up in Washington State, which I found to be very paranormal, it was regular to see shadow people, around properties and houses. And my an ex-girlfriend and I have actually done a whole podcast about these experiences. But my ex-girlfriend and I would often see, like this sort of like beings from other realities just phase into our physical space. And these things would oftentimes look like something out of a movie, these creatures and goblins and trolls and spooky things.
Would they look like what we would call a gray right now? It's kind of shorter, the big eyes, or they would be like...
Let's think less extraterrestrial and more like something from Lord of the Rings or
got it.
Fantasy, sort of like creatures like that, full-bodied apparitions that were like 6-7 feet tall that would look different. And we would see these manifest in physical very often in Olympia, Washington. So, I mean, over the course of my teenage years and going into my 20s, seeing, I don't know if they were a cryptid, but there's also, parallel realities and alternate dimensions where these, fairy type realms exist, and these things would sort of like bleed through and we would physically see them. And so I would have those types of encounters all the time.
In
Washington State.
Well, that's interesting.
Very paranormal.
So you saw a lot of that as you were young, and you were
Yeah,
just super interested, and you, of course, watched the movies, probably read the books and all of that.
everything.
All right.
Yeah,
And then
big into the
what
esoteric.
happened?
So
Yeah.
flashing forward in 2010, I was married at the time, and my wife and I moved to Buffalo, New York, Niagara Falls, New York. So that's across the country now,
Right.
3,000
Yep.
miles. This was 2010, right after we had gotten married. And once we got to Buffalo, there was actually a really cool, scary encounter that we had that sort of happened right before my spiritual awakening. So the
Hmm.
last paranormal encounter was we had gone to a concert in an area called Big Flats, which was very mountainous,
Okay.
rolling hills. You know, you have to drive really far through wooded areas. It was a big festival concert that ran late into the night, and this was the weekend. This was in June of 2010 that we had just moved. So this Big Flats was 3 hours away from Niagara Falls. So the concert ends at like 11:30, and we're driving home in the dark, and it's probably 1:30 in the morning, maybe 12 at this time, and our car broke down in the mountains. And yeah, I guess the alternator went, so the battery died. Which I thought was funny because we had driven the car across the whole country, 3,000 miles, and no issues. And then the first weekend we get there, it breaks down.
Of course.
So we're in the middle of nowhere, in the dark, in the woods, in the mountain passes of Big Flats, and we had a Sasquatch encounter face to face,
Wow.
direct encounter with the Bigfoot species together as a couple that very weekend.
So
And that
you
was
saw
still,
you saw him with your physical eyes. It
yeah.
wasn't just all right. All right.
Yep.
Go ahead.
We were,
Sorry.
yeah, we were like 10 foot. Now I don't want to waste the whole program with this story because I've
Right.
told it so many times. If anybody wants to hear a more thorough explanation, I have a YouTube video about my encounters.
Okay. And
But
we'll
I
talk
will
about it
say,
again separate, but go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, we broke down, and there was a rest stop about an hour, or excuse me, a mile. I like to say about a mile behind us that we passed on the other side of the thruway. So we had to walk through the median. You know how if there's the throughways going
Yeah.
this way and this way, there's the
Yeah.
median where
Yeah.
it's gravel, the turnaround. We just wanted to just cross the throughway right there and go on the other side and walk to
Right.
the restaurant.
Right. Okay.
And when we got out of our cars, we got out of the car to walk to the medium. Right when we stepped into the gravel, we heard a very large scuffle and like a breathe, like a heavy, like a very deep, like a bear, like a deep chest, sort of like breath, like a deep breath and a scuffle back right in front of us. And it was very, very dark because there wasn't any throughway lights here,
Right.
but we peered our eyes and we grabbed each other really quick because we were really scared. And I didn't know what was happening because, like, again, this is just before my spiritual awakening.
Right.
So I was still very 3D, I was very scared. We peer ahead of us, and the moon just happened to be placed behind. So we could see the silhouette of like a 7 or 8 foot giant, massive creature who was breathing heavy. And the only thing I can compare it to is if you heard like a bear
Yeah.
or like a deer, maybe a large deer or like a mountain lion or something that has like a very large, deep breath. That's what it sounded like. And we could see its silhouette in the moon. So we could see the shoulders and the head and the outline of it. And we were just frozen, terrified completely. And then it ran. So it turned and it ran past us. And you could hear like the weight of its feet,
Right.
how the
Right.
thing must have weighed hundreds and hundreds of pounds, like that running past us in the gravel. Bipedal, mind you, not 4 legs,
Right.
just 2
Right.
steps running through. And we just kind of trailed it. It's very dark, but we could sort of see some glistening in the moonlight of its shape. And it ran into the woods, right past where our car was broken down. And we panicked and ran back to the car and got into the car
Right.
because we knew we didn't know if we were in danger or not. And we sat there contemplating if what had happened was real and if we were
Right.
crazy or just dreaming it up, or maybe it was like a deer or something. But we knew, you're just in disbelief. It was like shock. So we discerned that we need to get out of the car because it's pitch black here and walk to that rest stop.
Right.
No matter what, we got to get there. So we get out of the car, and now we're staying on our side of the throughway instead of crossing the median again, because we tried that once. And we can hear it in the woods next to us. And it's just walking, trailing with us all the way to the rest stop. And as we got closer to the rest stop where, it was in sprinting distance, we started to walk a little bit quicker, and it stopped. The footsteps stopped because it was just trailing with us. And then it did that very stereotypical, quintessential Bigfoot screech that you hear on like the Travel Channel or the History Channel's like
Right.
documentaries. You
Right.
hear that howl in the woods, and it just like cuts you right through the body because you know that it can't be anything other than what you think it is. It's
Right.
just that. It is
Right.
that, period. And it's like it hits you so hard that we were like in shock. You just body freezes up, and then you could hear in the distance, probably pretty far out, someone's private property had a few dogs on it, and they started like barking in the distance because they heard it too.
Right.
And me and my ex-wife just ran. We just
Yeah.
ran to where the lights were. So that was my first sort of like Sasquatch encounter that I had in 2010, just before my spiritual awakening.
So interesting how they're drawn to you,
Yeah.
isn't it? I'm wondering what that means, like why, but it's very interesting. I know you did tell me that story before.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Pretty
So
amazing.
yeah. So let's progress. Like, what really led to the spiritual awakening? Can you tell
Got
us
it.
as much of the story as you're comfortable with, of course?
Oh yeah. I'm totally
Yeah.
transparent. Yeah.
Right.
In 2012, flash forward 2 years from the first Bigfoot
Right.
encounter. My ex-wife and I are still together, but we're on the rocks now at this point. And I had injured my stomach. I had a medical injury, some freak accident, where I like broke my intestines. And yeah, just like a fluke thing, a lot of times when people talk about their spiritual awakening, there's oftentimes a catalyst to it. Sometimes there
Exactly.
isn't, but there
Yeah.
usually is like something that put them through an extreme experience that leads them to
Right.
an alternate
Right.
perception of reality. And so I get this medical issue, and it's kind of scary, and it's concerning, and it's frustrating, and it's annoying. It becomes, financially taxing on our marriage. It becomes emotionally taxing on our marriage because now I'm chronically sick all the time. I'm not feeling good. And I was really diving into my journey as a filmmaker. So I am an actor and a filmmaker, and I do that all the time. I have been doing it now for 12 years, but it sort of started in 2010. But in 2012, when I wasn't feeling well, when I was feeling sick, I found that like when I would produce a movie or get a little independent acting role, it sort of gave me like an escape in a sense. It helped me sort of
Right.
channel my energy in a more positive thing that I enjoyed doing, that helped me feel good and distracted me from my reality, which was so difficult and dense at the time. So I started getting really heavy into acting and producing films. Even when I was chronically ill, I was doing them at the same time. And that even put more stress on my marriage because, my wife at the time, she just didn't really want me doing anything. And she was, taxed emotionally and financially by my medical issues. And so there was just a lot of strain there, until I think that I reached my own personal breaking point in the marriage itself that was just becoming very difficult for both of us,
Right.
and
Right.
emotionally burdensome. And her and I were both young, and we talked about it, and sometimes we wondered if we had gotten married for the wrong reasons. And under the stress and the pressure of my medical illnesses, I just I reached a breaking point, and I filed for separation. So I ultimately had, divorced my wife at the time, and that was really hard for both of us that I had to do that, and was also chronically ill at the time. I was working a job I hated. That's a big catalyst too for people who are oftentimes in like a financial situation or working in a sort of job that's sort of like soul sucking,
Right.
heavy, dense environment that you go to every day and barely make your cost of living, and you hate it. So I was working a job I hated. I was going through divorce and having these medical challenges. And I think that's where I reached like whatever, we would call a rock bottom.
Okay.
Very
Sometimes you need
depressed,
to get there, I think, but go ahead. Yeah.
very depressed,
Yeah.
financially broke, romantically broke, mentally broke, emotionally broke, physically broke, and very, very frustrated and confused. And what does it all mean? It's when we're in those darkest rock bottoms that you only really have one question. You don't want to solve all of your problems all at once. You need to understand, why is this happening? What is the meaning of life? Why am I here suffering? Why are we here to suffer? I'm so miserable. And so a good friend of mine, she and her and I were out to lunch while I'm still kind of going through the thick of this. And my ex-wife had moved out at the time, and I was sort of living alone. And I told her what I was going through. And we got off on this conversation about visions that I'd had when I was a teenager. And I used to have these visions as a teenager where I was standing around a very large table, and we were looking, it was in a group of people, like a councilship.
Right.
And I'm looking down into this table, and I'm seeing more that it's almost like in a sense, like a screen or a television. It's round.
Okay.
So it's like a portal that you can look into, like this hologram that you can use. I don't know, maybe like an Akashic Records type of thing, or maybe a camera that sees into planets. I don't know what it was, but I always used to have this vision that that's where I was, next to this table that was overlooking Earth. And I told her that in this vision that I'd had, I remember that sort of like a decision was made, and then I sort of just fell forward. I fell, and the people around me were still standing. And then I woke up as Daniel James. Almost like that was sort of like my incarnation process in a sense, metaphorically speaking. So when I told her this, she told me that she had read similar experiences of that in a book, which is what I'm getting at.
Was that a recurring vision? Like, did you have that more than once, that sort of vision?
As a kid and a teenager, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And was it always the same, like scene?
It would vary slightly, like,
Yeah.
and it's sometimes maybe the environment around me. It seemed like I was in like a very dark room.
Right.
That might have had some lights in it, maybe
Right.
almost like a spaceship or something. But they were very dark and damp in terms of like the brightness, so I couldn't make a lot out. It was really almost focused on this table in front of me that was like a hologram screen, and people with me, and I couldn't make out their faces or what they looked like, but I was part of this group. And it was so that's almost like, in a sense, what I saw before I was born is how I interpret that. So my girlfriend at the time, very good friend of mine still to this day, actually, I attribute a lot of my awakening to her. She said, okay, well, there's this book that I read. There's a series of books where they describe something similar to what you're describing. And that book was The Journey of Souls by Michael Newton, which there was 3 of them.
I just let somebody borrow my copies. That's so funny.
So you get it.
Yeah.
So you get it. So she said that it was sort of, people had described similar types of things prior to their birth. And so I'd never heard of Michael Newton or past life, in between life regression, LBL therapy. I never heard of any of that, life between life. So she gave me the first book, and I read it. And I wasn't a big reader. I didn't read a lot of books at the time. This is 2012, and I just was big into like movies and sci-fi, which I still am, but that's all I did. But I read this book cover to cover in like 3 days. I couldn't stop. I couldn't put it down, because at the time, that type of information for me, where I was in my own conscious development, was like cutting edge.
I was just going to say the words
mind-blowing.
cutting edge is what came to me. Yeah.
So I read it, and I feel like it was that book, it at a time that I needed to understand why I was suffering in every area of my life, financially, romantically, physically, medically, spiritually. I was at like the rock bottom, but this book had a good way of explaining to you why we experience the circumstances that we go through and the challenges in life. So as somebody who knows the book, you know what I mean.
Right.
It really helped me. It was very spiritually therapeutic. And I think that book, although I've sort of moved on from a lot of the sort of limiting beliefs that are in that narrative now, is where I'm at now. For its time, it was amazing. So then after Journey of Souls, I read all 3 books in like a week and a half. Loved them. And then I was on this quest for knowledge. I couldn't stop. I was like, wow, I have to know more. Anything that was spiritual, metaphysical, that wasn't exactly religious was very attractive to me. So then she gave me, the same girl, good friend of mine, she gave me the very first Seth Speaks book, which is some of like the oldest mainstream channeling that we have available by Jane Roberts. She gave me the first book in the series. And I read that book cover to cover in just a few days. And that was much more complicated in advanced metaphysics for somebody in 2012 who was still new into a spiritual awakening and trying to understand how the universe works and why. I felt that the very first book in the Seth Speaks series was amazing and awesome. And it sort of cracked me wide open. And So these two books were the catalyst to my spiritual awakening of me getting into metaphysics and understanding more of the nature of reality,
Right.
coming from a place of a very 3D mindset where I was dealing with the medical drama and the divorce and the
Yeah.
job I
Yeah.
hated. That's sort of how it happened. That's where it started in 2012.
So you gain understanding from the books and
Yeah, the
hope,
two books.
right?
Hope. Oh, big hope.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't like to say it this way, but sometimes we have to hit rock bottom. Like, if we didn't have challenges before us, we'd be sitting on the couch watching movies all day.
I
We
agree.
would not grow.
I agree.
There's no reason to change. There's no reason to look around and figure things out. There's no reason to grow. So you hit a very fast growth period because you were doing poorly at that time, and that totally changed your life around.
Yes, it did. And it was the
Yeah.
start of a deep dive, a several year dive. So
Yeah.
what year was that? 2012. It's so 10 years.
Yeah.
It's been
Yeah.
10 years, and I still study and research for probably 15, 20 hours a week.
Yeah.
The same as I did back then on, that those books led me into like basic entry level law of attraction, basic entry level channeling, entry level metaphysics. But for me at the time was the most
Huge.
groundbreaking
Yeah.
information and practices that you think that you were on, like magic, like real magic. And so I got into channeling really big in 2013 was the year that I discovered Abraham Hicks, Bashar,
Right.
those entities as well. And so then I'm studying. So I left the Jane Roberts material and the Journey of Souls material and moved into channeling, which is somebody who was so passionate and connected to the concept of aliens and life on other planets and ETs. When I realized that you could talk to aliens through a phenomenon called channeling, that's what attracted me to it.
Right. Right.
Then I get into channeling in 2013.
And are you still doing it? I know I've seen some of your videos, and they were super well done.
Thank you. Very occasionally.
Yeah.
Very occasionally. So when I taught myself to channel, I was a channeling fan from 2013 to 2015. In 2015, I moved to the state of Pennsylvania from New York. And when I moved here, I decided I was still a huge channeling fan. I was big into Bashar and Abraham Hicks and so many of the other greats that we have. I decided to do a film about it, a little indie movie.
Didn't know that.
And what I wanted to do was I wanted to integrate some of the experiences that I felt that I'd had throughout my life and to sort of make it a little bit of a true story.
Right.
So I wanted to teach myself how to channel for this movie. And so I could kind of base it on a true story and Daniel James's journey into channeling. And one other little thing I want to double back real quick is as a teenager, one of the themes that I play out in my lifetime are medical challenges. They're sort of like I manifest these medical crisis for myself throughout the years. Ever since I was a teenager, I've had some sort of like medical drama.
Okay.
So the one that I had with my stomach in 2012 was like one of just a series of them. So when I was a teenager, I was having like these really bad neurological issues, like mild seizures and stuff. And I'd sort of tie those experiences into this channeling movie that I made in 2015 that integrates aliens.
Okay.
So the movie is called Those Who Seek, and it's loosely based on a true story and my journey into channeling and some of my medical challenges that I've gone into throughout my life, which I also believe that oftentimes if you have a conscious awareness of what I call star family, in certain circumstances, in some cases, your extraterrestrial star family can intervene in terms of medical crisis under certain circumstances. So I kind of explore that theme as well in the movie. So I taught myself how to channel in 2015. And then the reason why I'm telling you this is because I actually didn't want to, I never intended on becoming like a channeler per se, that somebody that offers it as a service and does sessions. And now I'm on the internet and I have a website, you can hire me to do channeling. I really just taught myself how to do it for the sake of this movie. And then throughout the process of producing the film, I met so many great people in the community and I made so many friends who are channelers still that I got sort of introduced to the community, and people sort of caught, they heard about my channeling and they were interested in the beings that I work with. So then I would say by 2017, I started offering it as a service. And I did a little web series, a 12-episode web series that was all about the beings that I work with, that I channel. They're called the Za of Orion, which I know
Right.
you're familiar with.
Right.
So
Right.
I did a 12-episode series about their species and their civilization. And then from there, I did offer sessions for a while. And it's funny that you ask, because I have one tonight. I do have one. I do have one tonight. But the thing is I don't advertise it or market it anymore.
Okay.
And the reason why is because I actually teach a spirit contact tool now, where I teach people how to walk into the channeling state themselves so that they can make direct contact to their own spirit teams.
Okay.
So I felt that instead of being somebody, because like I had an addictive personality for many years where I would go see mediums and get a tarot reading every 4 months. And I would buy like a really expensive several $100 channeling session, every couple months.
Right.
Because I was somebody who had a lot of questions that needed answered. And I was very attracted to these sources of information. So I would spend all the money and book all the sessions. That's ultimately, partly why I taught myself how to channel as well. Because like, why pay all this money and get into this sort of habit of hiring people like an addiction when I can teach myself how to do it and then find my own information?
Well, it's surprising. I've got so many friends that do the same thing. They will go get reading upon reading upon reading, asking the same questions of every person. And they might get similar answers from different perspectives, and that's all good, but they don't realize that the power is within themselves.
Exactly.
And the channeler or the reader or whatever is a great tool, but you can't just rely on that. You have to use your discernment and
Correct.
kind of use your discernment and develop your own self.
Yeah, people can become, dependent and addicted
Right,
to
right.
information, and they'll spend, thousands a year on
Yeah,
sometimes, like you said, asking multiple sources the same question or asking the
right,
same question every time you book them. And it's like, okay, well, you could cut out the middleman here and
right.
learn how to connect yourself. And so when I taught myself how to channel, I'm self-taught. It's funny, I used one little piece of a manifesting technique taught by Seth in that very first Seth Speaks book. And then I bought some channeling class. I purchased some channeling classes and picked what I liked and left what I didn't.
Right,
And then I
right,
made my own method
right.
that, alters the brainwave frequencies to get you into the channeling state. So then I was like, okay, well, I'll offer this as a service because a lot of people really love my little Hermes guy that I channel. He has fans and I love that. I don't want to take that away from people. But once again, when I thought that, okay, well, I'm going to channel for myself so I don't have to hire other people to do it for me, then I started thinking, well, now I kind of don't want to channel for other people because I was starting to see patterns where people were hiring me multiple times all the time. And I felt like maybe they weren't fully benefiting from the experience because how much do you need? How many times do you have to do
Right, right,
before it's not constructive?
right,
And it's more of like, you're just like it's like a habit forming thing that you're doing.
right.
So, and I'm speaking for myself because I would see a medium on schedule every 4 months for
It's
years.
kind of on them though. If they keep coming back to you and paying you money for your session, it is on them, but there does come a point where, you have to draw a line. Like, I don't mind helping you, but I don't feel like you're actually getting the help.
Correct.
Not-
So
you're-
then,
yeah, you're looking for external sources.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's okay to a degree, but
Right.
when it becomes of like habitual and, maybe not constructive. So then I was like, okay, well, let me design a teachable, trainable exercise that I can do with people. So I like interacting with people. I love to talk to the people, but just doing the channeling for them felt like it wasn't as constructive as
Right.
a
Right.
service that I could offer. So
Right.
then to refine that, I made a channeling technique where I just basically, like, as if you and I were on a call together now, I could
Right.
walk you into the channeling state right here in this moment. And I could train anybody on how to do that, from an entry level beginner stage
that's
to anybody that's
interesting.
advanced.
Yeah.
And then that makes me feel like I'm providing more tangible value for you, because
Right.
once I teach you how to do it just one time, you can do it anywhere, at the mall, in your car, before work. while you're around a bunch of screaming family members or at the park meditating. It doesn't matter where you are. You can get into this altered state and communicate to your spirit teams in the moment. Now, I felt like that was offering a lot more value than just answering questions.
Right.
Pulling my ET beings that I work with and saying, "Hey, I need you to come hang out for a half an hour and we're going to answer some questions."
Yeah.
Instead, these people want to talk to their spirit guides. They want to talk to their passed on relatives, and I can help them get there on their own.
Right.
And I would feel more comfortable leading them into that very intimate, very personal experience on how they can do that on their own than me being the facilitator of it, which is sometimes emotionally overwhelming, to be,
Right.
if I'm
Right.
frank. When,
Yeah.
people asking me to channel their spirit guides for them and stuff, I can do it, but
Yeah.
it's overwhelmingly emotional to the type of bond that we as humans have with our spirit guides is so eternal and intense that to bring that energy through for them, I'm still feeling it. I'm still here. I'm still present in some way. It's still my body, my vessel, my machine. And I can't not feel the emotions between the two people. And I just felt like I don't want to be in the middle of that anymore. It's too intense.
Right.
It's not it's very intimate and personal. And I can feel the deep love that maybe a star family or a spirit guide or an angel or whatever people's belief structures are. I can feel the connection and the bond they have on a spirit level, on a soul level. And it is beautiful and it is magical and it is special, but it also feels kind of personal.
Right.
And I
Okay.
just didn't want to be in the middle of it anymore.
Right.
Especially for people who it was habit forming and they wanted it all the time. I'm like,
Right.
here, let me show you how to do it. And you could sit with this being for 10 hours if you want. So that's how my office offering the service sort of evolved over the years. And I market and advertise my spirit contact tool because that's something that I love doing. Let me tell you, Sue, that's rewarding for me emotionally, spiritually, financially, to help somebody connect to spirit on their own for the first time and witnessing that happen and being the one that helps walk them into that state. It is a true gift.
That's cool.
And
you'll send us a link for that.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
We're doing a new commercial for it next week. Lauren, my partner,
Awesome.
Lauren, and I, we're shooting a little commercial for that because I do want to do that more often. It's very rewarding for me. And I have a website for it where people can book sessions with that.
Okay.
And if they're interested and I'll do those all day.
All right. All right. So you'll send me the links and I'll put them below the video.
Yeah.
Is there anything you would, for a person that's wants to spiritually awaken and they're maybe reading the books or whatever, maybe they're not getting what you got out of it. Is there any advice you might give them or tips? Like how could they hasten their process, if you will?
Well, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Just let me feel this for a moment.
Okay.
Because speaking for myself, mine was triggered, right? There was a catalyst to mine. And oftentimes when I talk to other people who are explaining to me their spiritual awakening, they had a trigger too.
Right.
And it seems to be, generally speaking, now you're going to be an expert by the end of this, Sue, because you're going to talk to so many people who are giving you their experiences. You might be able to actually build a really interesting database of similar themes, right? But generally speaking, they tell me that there was a triggering event.
Right.
There tends to be something that sneaks up that they didn't plan for, they couldn't facilitate, they couldn't make happen, but it was one relationship breakup or a car accident or the new job that suddenly started taking you on traveling trips. There tends to be a circumstantial experience,
right,
part and parcel
a catalyst.
to a catalyst. Yeah. And generally speaking, I don't know how to trigger those for people.
Right.
It seems to happen when it's most relevant to the individual. So let me ask you this, and let me answer your question with a question. Have you also heard that the year 2012 seemed to have been a very common year for people's awakenings?
Yes. Yeah. And of course that was semi-planted in our brains. Like everyone predicted the end of the world then and all that, and the world was going to change. But I do notice at the time, my group had a lot of interesting things happening. It was a very active time spiritually. And yeah, I do.
So, okay, I want to give you a tangible answer, and I do have one.
Okay. Okay.
Here is what anybody can do to help accelerate a spiritual awakening if they've started it, or trigger one if maybe they don't really feel like they've had that aha moment, that
Right.
definitive light bulb where it's like, I know at this point in my life, this thing happened and that I saw the world differently.
Yeah.
Here is an actionable exercise you can take that will help you in the right direction. As you mentioned before, the challenge, for me, the catalyst was a sort of negative circumstances. Well, you have to understand that we live in a sort of a physical reality where duality and contrast are core fundamental mechanisms of our 3D experience. You're going to go through the polarities, the highs and the lows. And so oftentimes there is like a fear attachment. So what I'm getting at is this. If there is something that you've been wanting to do in your life, whether it's an artistic endeavor, a business endeavor, you want to take a trip to somewhere, or you want to suddenly quit your job and become self-employed into this passion that you love doing, but you don't know how it will financially support you, I would say just analyze your life and ask yourself, what is one thing I want to do that I'm not taking action on because I'm afraid of what will happen if I do? And then do the thing. Do that thing that you're afraid to do because you think that you don't have the money. You think that people will judge you. You think that something bad will happen as a result. Do it anyways, because there's a barrier there, an invisible barrier of fear that is holding you back from growth.
Right.
It's holding you back from progress. And all a spiritual awakening is an expansion of your consciousness.
Right.
That's all any growth or progress really is when we're having a 3D experience. So you want to trigger more, you want to trigger more growth and learning, then do something that you feel called to do that you've been putting off or saying no or avoiding. Just do it. Genius.
Right. Because it does cause everything to come up, and you'll figure it out. You're going to figure it out. And
things will
like
surface
I said,
that you need to.
If we didn't have these growth opportunities, we'd be sitting on the couch, fat and happy. Nothing would ever change. So we have to do things to force our growth in a way, and just opening your mind, or being, open-minded enough to say, I'll listen to a new idea. I might not believe it, but let me read this book. Let me listen to this video. Let me talk to this person. That can be expansive, because it may not stick in your brain at that moment, but it might come into fruition down the road. You never know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You never know.
Yeah. And of course, you cannot plan for these catalysts, because, sometimes it's a crisis that happens. And you just react to the crisis however you do. For me, it was a little softer. I had 2 or 3 things happen. I didn't know they were going to be life-changing. They were things that I learned and I tried differently. They were soft, but they led to big change.
Okay.
Right. So everyone has their own path. And I think that's really what I'm trying to show with these videos. Everyone has started in a different way. We've awakened in different ways. We're never, done, if you will. But how we got to this part is so interesting. And if we can offer people just a couple little tidbits to make them feel like, oh, I'm doing okay. And I like what you said, open your mind. What aren't you doing? Why not just give it a try?
Exactly.
So basic, huh?
Yeah, we love to complicate things as humans. It's if it isn't hard or difficult to understand, complex, then we almost don't even really believe it, because we tend to complicate things.
Yeah, well, totally. And I think you had a great advantage because your mother was open-minded way
Supported.
Back then. Okay, so she was with you. You had some unusual experiences, and we haven't heard all of them yet. But the fact that she was there with you and didn't shut you down is really impressive. So you've had these dreams, visions, experiences throughout your life. You've just kind of put them in the back burner and watched what happened, and then more things happen, and your mind has been expanded so many times, and it's not over yet. It's not
Yeah.
over yet, is it? Isn't it
No, it
fun?
isn't.
Yeah.
I'm feeling more fun,
Yeah.
and I'm feeling more mystery, and I'm feeling more adventure
Right.
now than I
Right.
have in the last 3 years, which I'm sure a
Yeah.
lot of people, we don't need to
Yeah.
say why, but I'm sure a lot of people have been lacking adventure.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm feeling more now than ever.
Yeah. Well, I have to say the last 2 years probably was a catalyst for many people. They had to
Mhm.
figure out what they were going to do with their lives, what they
That's
wanted.
right.
And not many of them, not all of them, but I think for many that I've talked to, it's been a positive change. Like it was a catastrophe. They had to figure it out. They're kind of through the opposite end, and they're in a much better place than they were to begin with. Or they're going to be much happier once it smooths out a little bit.
And
Yeah.
I'm glad you
Yeah.
mentioned that, because as we talk about catalyst and we talk about
Yeah.
triggers,
Yeah.
the whole stuff that we went through, we don't want to say too much so you don't get your video deleted. But we that I think the last 2 years, whether it was like the whole political thing back when we were changing presidents, or whether it was like the protests, or whether it was the sort of like medical scares throughout the country and the world, the variety of these sort of collective things that reached people on a collective level, spiritually, mentally, and emotionally, financially, were generally perceived in a negative way, which I hate to say it, but in 3D
Right. Right.
incarnations, negativity can have positive results in terms
Right.
of it being catalyst and a trigger. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think maybe just talking about spiritual awakenings alone, I think a lot of people did trigger an
Right.
awakening of some sort, because when very divisive things happen in our society that cause people to choose a side or weigh in or offer their perspective or even argue their point, it really helps you investigate where your beliefs are
Right.
and where the worlds are. And then that process alone as a mechanism can be very investigative and very self-explorative in terms of like figuring out who you are, which in a sense is its own type of awakening
Right.
and
There was
reveal.
so much going on all at the same time, as you mentioned, like every system, every corrupt system that we have, which is pretty much everything, being exposed and coming down all at once. And of course,
Yeah.
it leaves the average person feeling very afraid and alone and uncertain. I understand that, being human, but um, it has to be exposed and changed. I mean, you can't have change without exposing it, right?
Correct.
And correcting what needs to be corrected. So it is actually a very exciting time. I'm very interested in what's going on, although it is emotional, and I'm glad I'm where I am now. I feel like in a very secure position now, but a couple of years ago, not so much. So
Uncertainty.
yeah,
More
yeah,
uncertainty than I can ever.
Right.
There have been times with my medical situations where the uncertainty of my medical situation was horrifying,
Right.
terrifying, and the unknown was so scary.
Right.
But there was even more than that for everybody, for the whole planet the last 2 years. And even
Yeah.
now still,
Yeah.
is if you study alternative news and you're somebody who investigates and asks questions, then there are probably a lot of very concerning mysteries on planet Earth right now that are asking us to wonder what's going to happen next, or
Right.
where is this
Right.
going? How
Right.
bad can it get before it gets better? And there's a lot of fear in the unknown in that as well. But if anything, you can still look at it from an empowering perspective, and
Right.
always anchoring yourself in the moment,
Right.
knowing who you are and where you stand
Right.
on the particular, whatever the
Exactly.
mass
Yeah.
consensus is.
Yeah.
And then always, of course, allowing your opinions to change as well.
Right. And like I said, I think, and of course, there are those that are still in fear, that are
Mhm.
not questioning anything, that they just, swallow down whatever they're given. All right. We're
Yeah.
always going to have those people. But I think a lot of people have, this period has awakened them in some way. Now, whether it's
Mhm.
spiritual or not is another question, but they're maybe a little more open-minded, or they're trying new things, or they're doing something totally different than they did 2
Yeah.
years ago. So
And
I
that's
think,
good.
even though it's kind of a sick and twisted thing to say, it's been a good thing. It's been a good
Yeah.
thing. It's just it's been hard, and I don't think we're going to go back to what we would call normal. It's going to be a new version of how Earth will be. It's going to be exciting, actually.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
here for it. We're here
Yeah,
for
we're
it.
here.
We're going to experience it no matter what.
We're in for the long haul. And yeah, I would like to talk with you at length in the future about your dreams, visions, your
Sure.
angelic, your UFO contact, of course, the other Bigfoot stories,
Yeah.
and whatever else. But I think you've given us some great information. And to summarize, open mind, expand your awareness, try new things, right?
Hmm.
And you, what have you got to lose, really? Right? You learn new things. You may or may not believe them. You never know where they'll lead you.
It's all positive growth from the
Yeah.
right perspective. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I look forward to talking to you really soon. Thanks, Daniel. And I'll do another video about all those crazy experiences. Looking forward to
awesome.
it.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Sue.
Bye-bye. Take care.